The big intersection of justice and poverty is family law, personal status issues. So issues related to marriage and divorce and inheritance and child custody and alimony and child support. This is where we've seen the most demand, where we were really able to measure demand, because these issues really have the biggest impact on poverty. For example, if you're a poor woman, you really need access to your alimony, you really need access to child support, you really need access to your inheritance. So where the system breaks down in those cases is where you see the most disadvantage to poor women. I think culturally it's a big problem because there are a lot of cultural barriers women might face to try to go to court in the first place. They may see it as bringing shame on the family, they may be prevented from male relatives, this type of thing. But once people try to access the courts, there really isn't so much of a problem for women. The bigger problem is that where we see this kind of confluence of poor service delivery, poor targeting, tends to affect women. It's in a way almost kind of a perfect storm of poor service delivery impacting poor women, and that's services tend to be targeted not very well towards things like family law, and services related to enforcing decisions when it comes to things like alimony and child support are very poor throughout the region. So the people that are really suffering the most of this confluence of events are poor women. If you take a step back and look at what kind of the main findings are, it's that the justice sector, like a lot of other sectors when it comes to service delivery in MENA, is plagued by the situation where the legislation isn't necessarily so bad. In fact, in terms of legal rights to things like legal aid and having court fees waived or postponed based on poverty, it's actually quite good. I mean, people do enjoy a lot of rights on paper, but it's just not administered in practice. Governments haven't really set up systems for administering any of these services, and this is really the biggest problem. And it's not really a priority for a lot of governments. For them, they tend to focus on the private sector, things like commercial disputes, contracts, this type of thing, as really being a way of promoting economic development, of promoting private sector investment, and this type of thing. Also that, the services that exist on paper, people tend not to even know that they exist. In fact, even sometimes judges and lawyers that we met with had no idea that people had the right to legal aid or had the right to ask for court fees to be waived. One of the other major problems was that even where people were aware of the services, the procedures required for actually accessing the services, for getting legal aid, for getting your court fees suspended, are so complicated and so time-consuming that no poor people would really have the ability to go through this type of process. Also, services tend to be very ad hoc. Some people get them, some people don't. There's not this very clear eligibility criteria. There's no monitoring and evaluation of services, and there's really no mechanisms for feedback. So just from a service delivery perspective, the atmosphere is really quite bad. What we were kind of surprised to see was that in some cases, if you look at what's happening in other regions outside of MENA, and how countries are trying to address this situation, one of the interesting issues that comes up is, what is the role that lawyers play when it comes to legal aid or providing pro bono free legal assistance to poor people. In almost all of the MENA countries, there's a requirement that lawyers provide some type of assistance, but it's just not administered at all. So even where, in a way, they're kind of on the cutting edge of improving service delivery, it's still not implemented. Where we saw a lot of very interesting innovation, though, was when it came to family courts and personal status issues. In a number of countries, Jordan, the Palestinians, countries in North Africa like Tunisia and Morocco have been ahead of the game for a long time, have instituted things to make it easier for women to get access to alimony and child support, realizing that this has a big impact on poverty and a big impact on women, and that these services are particularly difficult to deliver. One of the other interesting findings was you look at a country like Iraq, And Iraq had a lot of these type of innovations 30 and 40 years ago, but they've all kind of just disappeared because of the conflict and the situation there. Where things have been most successful is where they experiment with different type of service providers, pro bono lawyers, legal aid, public defenders, contracting out to private lawyers to do work, using law students, using apprentices, training paralegals. And the MENA region has been extremely slow to experiment with these type of things. The governments have been slow to kind of address this, and where civil society and other people have tried to step in and fill this void, the bar associations have usually been quite hostile to other people moving in on what they see as kind of their territory. So one thing that we've really pushed for is for governments to start experimenting not only with different type of service providers, but different type of services. For example, developing tools for people to be able to represent themselves in court for very simple procedures. For example, things that are related to personal status or to civil law.